I'll get started with a couple of housekeeping items. Nice to see everybody and thank you for joining. My name is Maya Brady and I'm part of the Ellevation team here. Been working with Ben to put together some of these sessions for you this week, and I'm so happy to have Sandra, who works at Ellevation, and she'll be able to give us a lot of insight on dual language and biliteracy today. So really excited about the session. But before we get started, just wanted to share, there's a lot of you participating in the chat, which we love. Just take a moment to take a look at who you're sending your chats to, and make sure that in that dropdown, you select the dropdown and select panelists and attendees. If it's just to panelists, it's only the Ellevation folks that are going to receive it. We want you to be interacting and engaging with one another as well. So make sure that attendees is also selected. You'll also notice down at the bottom that there is a chat option and a Q&A option. If you have questions for Sandra, please drop that in the Q&A. That's how we'll keep track of the questions that are coming through, and we'll more easily be able to select you and your question to answer at a later point in the presentation. But if you're doing general chatter and kind of want to share resources and share opinions on things and what you're really liking, please continue to put that in the chat. Other than that, I'm really excited to hear from Sandra. I've had the pleasure of working with her a couple of times on a couple different presentations at Ellevation, and hearing from her, and just love her approach, the way that she presents. And I think you're all in for a treat as well, as a couple of takeaways that are going to be amazing for you. So without further ado, I'll introduce Teddy Rice, our president and co-founder, who will share a little bit more about Sandra.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I think this might be the last of our EL Impact sessions, last but not least. And for those of you who've been participating over the last few days, it's been a fabulous experience for us. And I hope that a lot of you have enjoyed a lot of the content. I'm happy to introduce Sandra Medrano-Arroyo from Ellevation, who started her life as a bilingual and bicultural home in the New York City area, and has spent much of her professional life focused on making sure that educators and students see the value and realize the full benefits of a multilingual education. Prior to joining Ellevation as our dual language instructional content specialist, Sandra was down in Florida, in Palm Beach, in the dual language program down in Palm Beach School District. And we were very grateful to have her join the company and drive and lead a lot of our efforts to make sure that we were building products and serving the needs of dual language and bilingual programs all across the country. So with that, I'll let Sandra take over. I may pipe in with a question or two as we get through this, but I think a lot of you will see some super valuable information here. And Sandra, why don't you take it away? Thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Teddy, for that beautiful introduction. See a lot of my friends in the chat and a lot of new friends. So that's always super exciting for me. I think at this point, I'm going to share my screen and get you all. Oh, all right. Just a thumbs up if anyone can see that, that would be great. Thank you. All right, so it's an honor to be able to spend the next hour with so many educators and present on behalf of Ellevation. It's been very exciting working with Ellevation, so I'm truly pleased to be able to present some of the work that we've done today. Today, I'm going to address two learning targets within this next hour. We're going to have time to share some of our ideas, hopefully, amongst all of you, because the best way to learn is from each other. And then we're also going to become familiar with Ellevation's dual language practices of advanced biliteracy and co-construct cultural competency.
Sandra, I don't mean to interrupt, but it looks like you're in presenter mode. So we can see your notes.
Let's change that. Hold on. All right. Hang on a moment. Let's try that again. We're going to stop sharing. We're going to start all over again. All right. Does that work?
Much better. Looks great.
Okay. All right. And can you see my notes?
We can.
Again, no problem.
I know, Teddy, sometimes you've done this before. Maybe Ben, do you know if there's a way to switch it?
I think if you present and then when you share screen, just share the Chrome tab that's already in the presenter mode with the slides, then you'll still be able to have your notes without us seeing them.
You see how we all learn from each other? Let's try that. How does that look?
Great.
No notes.
Right. Okay, so. All right, so for the purpose of this session, at this point, I don't know where we're at, but the learning targets are certainly going to be learning from each other and exposing you to some of the activities that we've created throughout this time. So for the purpose of this session, dual language, I wanted to define dual language because sometimes that label defines different types of programs. But we're going to be speaking about a program, an additive bilingual program that definitely would encompass any one of our bilingual education programs. Okay, and throughout this hour, I'll be sharing lots of practices and strategies that would work just as well in a dual language program as well as in a bilingual education setting. Quickly though, I'm going to review the 3 pillars of dual language. Every decision in a district or in a school must be in alignment to these 3 goals. You've hopefully seen these before. Especially if you want to have a successful and equitable program that produces bilingual, bicultural, and biliterate students. It's not an easy task. All right, so welcome to my Bitmoji classroom. Had a lot of fun creating this one. And we're gonna play a little game since it's the afternoon. We're gonna play I Spy with my dual language I. So if you could please take a couple of seconds and start chatting away. List a few things in the chat feature that you noticed about my dual language classroom. I love it. I spy a pared de palabras. Books, great. Great books, thank you. Text in 2 languages side by side, great. Professional books, that's been a hit, huh? My bookcase, you guys like my bookcase, I'm glad. Variaciones regionales, yes. Beautiful, you guys play this game really well, thank you. So to my administrators in the audience, and I hope that we have a few, take note, because these are some of the things that you should see in your classrooms as you walk in and out, whether you're doing so virtually or physically. Classrooms should not, the Spanish and the English should not look alike, which is something that I know causes some confusion sometimes. We're going to go on and dive a little deeper into each one of the things that you noted here. So it's understandable that one would think, where do I begin? Because there is so much to consider when it comes to dual language. And as you look at these 3 goals, I mean, they're huge. And it's not an easy task, like I said before, and it's a responsibility that we place on our own shoulders. We owe to our families and our students and to society at the end of the day. So as we go forward, most of you noticed my library. So I had a few images of books in my Bitmoji classroom that live in my own personal bookcase. I have plenty more, but they just didn't fit in my classroom. But I refer to them constantly. And so I'm going to be sharing some of them today, along with quotes that I've kind of extracted from them that reinforce the topics that we're going to be discussing. So Biliteracy from the Start, which is written by Dr. Kathy Escamilla, describes the Literacy Squared framework in detail. And she states, teachers are encouraged to adapt and utilize methods of literacy instruction that have been demonstrated to be effective in Mexico and other Central and South American countries, rather than directly applying strategies for English literacy to the teaching of Spanish literacy. And I'm sure that you have all heard a lot of our experts in the field say it, don't teach Spanish a la English. It's not going to work. You're not going to create biliterate and bilingual children. And so when we ask ourselves, where do I begin? Because simply to teach our youngest learners, look at all the things that we need to consider. And I've put it before you a chart of similarities and differences in initial literacy development. There's and this isn't even all of them. And so when we talk about syllables, for example, that's the most important skill in Spanish, emergent literacy. Yet in English, we don't teach that until they're probably around 3rd grade. When we look at accents, you need to understand how vowels and syllables are formed so that you know where to place your accent. Yet in English, we have an oral emphasis. We don't have an accent mark. Our sight words, Spanish is easily decodable, but in English, there are some long charts that we have to memorize sometimes of words that just don't fit any rule. So there's a lot to take into consideration. And all of this needs to be included into your instruction and evident on the walls of your virtual or physical classroom. So after all this, let's take a few minutes to speak about the word walls. So a lot of you noticed I had a word wall for CSZ, cena, silla, y zapato. But I could have also had a word wall that displays similar sounds like Q and C, queso y casa. Other letras tramposas are tricky letters in Spanish, like the double L and the Y, the B and the V, the silent H. These word walls, we have, word walls that include gender and numbers, as you saw again in my classroom. High frequency words that need accents, tildes, diéresis, such as papá, piña, bilingüe. None of these word walls or anchor charts that I've mentioned would I ever need on the English side. So here's the second book from my collection, Teaching for Biliteracy by Dr. Not sure if they're doctors, I believe so, Karen Beeman and Cheryl Uro, and they've got a fabulous website that accompanies this book. They state that successful visual charts in Spanish match how Spanish works. So that sounds pretty easy. But what that truly means is that these visual charts, whether they're word walls or anchor charts, they have to begin in kindergarten and follow our students all the way through their grade levels. So in the case of kindergarten, for example, teachers should begin with examples of syllables, as we saw, and then through intermediate, move those visual charts into building upon each other, looking at the standards and making sure that we're covering that and building upon their foundational skills. By middle school, they can begin to demonstrate linguistic borrowings, for example, rancho and ranch. And by high school, they need to reflect informal and formal language, language structures, regionalisms are always important. And these visual charts are generated by the student, by their linguistic needs. Students don't outgrow them. Unfortunately, so often I've walked into secondary classrooms and there's nothing on the walls. Our kids need those visual aids because they're constantly developing and acquiring language. So in Ellevation, you'll find 2 activities for word walls. There's word walls, found in the practice to develop academic language, and that's specific for our English learners. And then you'll also find Spanish word walls, which is found in the practice of advanced biliteracy. And that's specific to noting the similarities and differences between the students' 2 languages. So we go as far, as you noticed, to note the reminder that when word walls are created in the partner language, they shouldn't mirror English word walls because each language works differently. And here's another perfect example. This is a chart from Cal. And it talks a lot about the differences between Spanish and English. And Spanish word walls should be about the intricacies of the Spanish language. But then they also need to take into consideration word banks that your Spanish language learners are going to need. So for example, if I were reading Marisol McDonald, No Combina, I could create a word wall to describe emotions or provide a list of adjectives. Our Spanish language learners need that. Even if our native Spanish speakers don't, which, you know, I always say a visual aid is a good thing. So, and think about how beneficial this could be to them when they produce a piece of writing. So before moving on to the topic of cognates, which I noticed you all commented on in the Bitmoji classroom as well, I'd love to hear from you. How are teachers implementing word walls in a virtual setting? Because we all know what they look like in a regular classroom. How are you incorporating this into your virtual online teaching? In a Google Classroom post, okay. And when you say digital, somebody said, Magdalena, you said digital word walls. What does that look like? I'd love for the rest of our audience to, is that a Google Doc that you're using or? Bitmoji classroom with hyperlinks, fantastic, love it. Yeah, because at the end of the day, our kids are at home learning. And I can tell you, because I homeschool my grandchildren here, and I'm constantly looking to see what is provided for my granddaughter to be successful in school. And so now think about a parent who doesn't know the language that their child is learning. How beneficial would it be for a parent to be able to click in a resource center or resource section of your Google Classroom, or to be able to print out something that they could even put in front of their child's learning environment. QR codes, that's getting real fancy. Love it, thank you. All right, so the next book I'll be sharing with you is Toma la Palabra by Dr. Monica Lara. This is from our friends in Sidlets. The quote is in Spanish, but it speaks to the explicit examination of the differences and the similarities between two languages and how that's a crucial component in dual language programs, which is why a focus on cognates is so important to the program. All right, so just again, I'm really big on terminology. I want to make sure we all have a shared understanding of the terms that we're using. So cognates are words in two languages that share a similar meaning, spelling, and a punctuation. And according to the research, no matter what research you read, basically, regardless of the language you speak, if you can note similarities and differences between the two languages, you've already won half the linguistic battle. So when you're learning a new language, a cognate is an easy word to remember because it looks and it means the same thing as a word you already know. So we read this last quote where bilingual speakers recognize and produce cognate words more quickly and accurately than non-cognate words. And how do we as educators tap into that? Knowing that cognates are so important to the development of another language, how do we incorporate that aside from just putting a visual aid on the wall? So let's take a look. Let's dive a little deeper because we figured that out for you in Ellevation. So in a classroom, you should always have a cognate wall. We've established that. You can definitely have a few of them that serve different purposes. In our collecting cognates activity, which is found in the practice of advanced biliteracy, we remind teachers that teaching cognates should never be an isolated event, that teachers are not the translators. You're there to help the students make the connection between the two languages. There's no need to translate. That cognate word walls are not something you put up unless it's been created through a structured activity. And that through the use of a cognate wall, your students are going to be able to note similarities and differences between the two languages. So it's not something that we just put up. For example, you saw mine, number, número. We don't just put that up, we talk about that. And by the way, the dual language tips that you see before you, these are in Spanish, you'll see some others in English, but they're a component of every one of the activities authored specifically for dual language. So if we look at suffixes such as CION, Most of us have already realized that these words relate to TION words. So comunicación, communication, interacción, interaction. That's probably some of the more common ones. But we need to take time to look at suffixes that are less common, such as DAD, and how these words relate to TY in English. And if we don't explicitly teach these suffixes and demonstrate how they relate within each language, we can't expect that our students are just going to know it. Any other examples? I'd love to, again, to hear from you. Any other examples of suffixes that can be used in strategic word study that anyone would love to share? See what we got there. Navajo language is quite difficult, yeah. Mente, L-Y, very good. OSO with O-U-S, like fabuloso, and fabulous, another one that has many words. And the beauty of this is that you can do this in any content area. This isn't just for a literacy classroom. This is for any content area. And there, I look at this and I think of these great resource documents that you can create and post them in a resource center in your Google Classroom. And as students come across any of the cognates in whatever they're reading, whatever assignment, they can go ahead and post it in that classroom and it becomes that living document. Okay. And then let's not forget false cognates, because it's important that your students know that false cognates exist and they take note of false cognates and they add that to that list, and that this visible list is a constant in your classroom, especially for your Spanish language learners. Because when we look at this chart, for example, éxito, which means success in Spanish, definitely does not mean the same as exit in English. I'm going to share a quick story with you. When I was a young girl many years ago, back in New York, my father and I drove past a store and it had huge letters on the window, S-A-L-E. And I knew how to read in Spanish, but I didn't speak or read in English. And I was completely puzzled. I could not understand. I couldn't understand their sign. And for those of you who don't speak Spanish, S-A-L-E, sale, means to leave. So I couldn't understand, why are store owners asking people to leave their store? Well, obviously they were having a sale, and I never forgot that definition or the application of each word in either of the two languages. But I sit here and I think about our Spanish language learners, and they most definitely need to understand that these words do exist. Largo, long, yeah, it's not large, good. Great examples, thank you. Embarazada. I know. Colorín Colorado is a fantastic website for all things regarding English learners. And it has this wonderful cognates list. It's available in 2 languages. And I looked at it and I thought, oh my goodness, this is so helpful when partner dual language teachers are planning, especially if one of the partners is a native English speaker, because so often teachers will tell me, well, how do I even know if a cognate exists in that child's language? So to have a chart like this that you can quickly reference to when you're doing your lesson planning is a lifesaver. And then lastly, on the topic of cognates, if you don't already have this Chrome extension, I highly suggest you look for it after the session and you install it. For my English only friends, again, who ask, how do I know if a word has a cognate or not? How do I help my student? I don't speak Haitian Creole. I don't speak Portuguese. This extension automatically highlights all of the English cognate words. And it's, again, usable for Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Italian. Obviously, if you Google cognates in other languages, you're going to get tons of information as well. But let me show you an example of this one. So this is an article straight out of USA Today. It's dated November 4th, which I simply cut and pasted into Word. And then I hit the Cognate Highlighter app. So pretty cool as we read through that, huh? So thinking about that, how powerful is it for you as a teacher to know that if you provided this type of a passage to your students, that more than half of the words in this article are already familiar to your kids. And then thinking from a student's perspective, how incredible would it be for them to realize, oh my goodness, okay, I think I can manage this. I know a lot of these words. Think about how successful they could feel right off the bat. This is a super powerful tool to share with students and families during our virtual teaching times. All right. Another book on my shelf. And if you're in dual language, I really hope you recognize this book. This is what so many of us in dual language go back to over and over again. I mean, mine is completely earmarked. It's Cal's Guiding Principles for Dual Language Education. It's the 3rd edition. And you should be consulting that repeatedly if you're looking to keep your promise to families of creating bilingual, biliterate, and bicultural students. So according to them, and I've posted this straight out of the book, they state that instruction should strategically incorporate opportunities to make cross-linguistic connections. So when we look at cross-linguistic connections, another one of my books in the bookcase, which is written by Dr. Sonia Soltero. She's one of Ellevation's dual language advisors. And here's what she has to say about the cross-linguistic connections. She says cross-linguistic strategies allow students to compare and contrast words, grammar, sounds, and idiomatic expressions between 2 languages. And so those of you who know me, I always say, well, what does that look like? So what does that look like in a dual language classroom? What you have before you is a bilingual book, obviously. I am not a fan of having a library of translated books. However, there is a specific time and place for the use of bilingual books. And having a few bilingual books at your disposal provides a great opportunity to review the explicit instruction that has to be included in a lesson. So I'm going to take us back to the chat. I'd like for you to post just a few things that stand out to you as you compare these 2 covers in Spanish and English. Punctuation marks, yeah, definitely. The Spanish font for the title is smaller. Let me look at that. It is. Also consists of 4 words, not 3. Use of articles. Right, so we have a short list, and I'm sure more is coming in. All words are not capitalized in Spanish. Just by noting these couple of things that we're reading in our chat, think about all the things that our kids have to learn before they even start reading. And it's our responsibility as educators to make sure that we explicitly include that in our lessons. So you need to talk with your students and point out, for example, the difference in punctuation that we immediately saw, the accent over que, the fact that in Spanish, we only capitalize proper nouns. What is love? We've got capitalized what and love? Not so in Spanish. And these are crucial conversations to have in order for students to begin to understand how language works. It doesn't just happen. Unfortunately, that would make life a whole lot easier for us in dual language. So opening that book now and talking about the similarities and differences between the 2 languages allows the students to know, to internalize how language works. You notice that in Spanish here, the text has a dash, which indicates dialogue. And that needs to be taught because in English, we use quotation marks. Once again, punctuation, beginning and end in Spanish. And regardless of whether your program is in Spanish, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Haitian Creole, whatever, and I love all those languages in our programs, there'll be cross-linguistic connections that we will have to explicitly teach. So for example, verbs in Haitian Creole are not conjugated and plural nouns don't exist. Completely, again, something that needs to be intentionally structured within a lesson. So a child who is learning in this language understands these specific language structures. And I don't speak Haitian Creole for those of you who are wondering, but I do have some very dear friends. And I learned a lot about the language. Again, the similarities and the differences of the language. In a virtual setting, I imagine this to be an explicit lesson in which the teacher is now recording herself and posting it online, or perhaps sending it home via text message or an email, so that students can refer to it whenever they need to. And I would definitely encourage teachers to record themselves reading books in the language of instruction so that parents and students can enjoy reading together. Because in this virtual setting, that becomes very difficult once the computer screen closes for our kids. All right, let's look at these words. Accompany, let's see if they come up. They're coming up. All right, so looking at these words, accompany, acompañar in Spanish, furious, furioso, odious, odioso, profundity, profundidad, castigate, castigar, pallid, pálido. These are everyday words in Spanish. These are everyday words. We use these all the time. So for example, acompaña tu amigo a la oficina, accompany your friend to the office. Are you feeling well? You're a little pale. ¿Estás bien? ¿Te sientes pálido? ¿Te ves bien? ¿Estás pálido? Castigate, to punish. As a mom and a grandmom, pórtate bien o te voy a castigar. These are words that we use every day. So one more reason to keep in mind that our students all bring assets with them. And even when we can't even immediately see them, these are words that are quite known to them. They just need the exposure in English. Also keep in mind that Spanish and English share over 20,000 cognates, and what might be a tier 2 word in English is most likely a tier 1 word in Spanish. I'm also going to add here that a tier 1 Spanish word, such as castigar and profundidad, still need to be taught, especially because you have Spanish language learners in your class. Should also go without saying, but I'm going to go ahead and put this in there. Tier 3 words that are more academically focused and relate to a specific content area must be taught as well. Although regardless of regional variations, all Spanish-speaking countries have the same academic terms. So for example, an academic term, a specialized term such as mitochondria, will be the same in all Spanish-speaking countries, but it's a cognate in English, mitochondria. And so that's powerful. It's a powerful tool for our kids to have in the classroom to be successful. All right, quick exercise. If you could do me a favor and please take a few seconds, look at these 2 glossaries. And in the chat, again, list some comments about what stands out to you. Lots of cognates. Mm-hmm. Spanish definitions contain more words, yeah. And so I'm going to click over. These are all great comments. Thank you. Definitely cognates. You definitely saw some cognates, but I think we also need to focus on the fact that not only are many of these words cognates, but something like the word take, which in English is a tier 1 word. The Spanish version uses the word extraen, which is a tier 2 word, and it truly means to extract that mineral. So looking at the rigor presented to our students and in a parallel resource, simply because of the vocabulary, how rich, again, the language is and the language learning process has to be. And if we don't make these instructional linguistic connections, we're going to be teaching for literacy in 2 different languages, Spanish and English, but not teaching for biliteracy. All All right, last note on the cross-linguistic connections. One more thing many of you noticed in my classroom was an anchor chart on regionalisms. Discussing cultural variations of a word or a phrase is a way to make those cross-linguistic connections. And what a way to build self-esteem, to highlight the assets our kids bring, and remind students that the way they say something is not wrong. On the contrary, let's all learn about the many ways to say a word such as bus, okay? Autocar, autobús, colectivo, camión, omnibus, guagua. But wait, because then I realized that guagua also has various meanings. It means a baby in South America. It describes an animal in Colombia. It's an insect in Cuba and Dominican Republic. Okay, that's huge learning that's happening there. And notice also, my board has different fonts, and it's not because I wanted to be cute in my font selection. It's simply because I wanted to make sure that I reminded everyone that these have to be generated by the students. It's not the Spanish that we as the educators speak, it's the Spanish that the kids speak. And they need to generate those word walls. They need to manipulate those word walls or anchor charts. And again, it should be a reflection of their culture, their pride, their language. I love regional variations. So if anyone has anyone in the audience has any that they'd like to share, I would love to look at some of them. Let's see what pops up. Dominican Republic, we use guagua for bus. Papalote, cometa, chiringa, yeah, definitely. Straw is one of the words that has the most variations depending on the country. I need to write that down and look that one up. It's going to be in my next Bitmoji classroom. Gloria, use Spanish counting words in the Philippines. Interesting. Sorbeto, pitillo. Beautiful, yeah. Love it. These are the things that our kids need to learn as they're learning language and culture. Right, which, of course, now brings us to the cross-cultural competency piece. You might have heard how the third goal of dual language, to create cultural competency and awareness, is the forgotten goal. Because the assumption is that if you're teaching in another language, culture is automatically going to be a part of it. It's going to be infused somehow. But I had a very dear friend of mine who always reminded us that an infusion, salt and pepper, are considered an infusion, un sazón. But our kids deserve much more than that. They deserve the entire buffet. So let's quickly read what an exemplary program looks like according to the guiding principles. They talk about curriculum incorporating culturally relevant materials in both programs, both program languages, sorry. They talk about teachers demonstrating knowledge of the students' backgrounds, the cultures, the interests, the special needs. They talk about regional language varieties, which we've just had some fun with here, being represented in materials, and opportunities for students to engage in community-based projects that address local concerns and deepen home community school connections. What a beautiful time for us to be able to really dive into that. All right. And again, diversity, when we speak of diversity, I want to make sure we all understand it's diversity on many different levels. It's on the linguistic, the cultural, and the socioeconomic level. So all students in and out of a dual language program must feel respected. They must feel welcomed. They must feel valued. All of them should be able to see themselves in the books they pick up or are assigned to read. All decisions, such as staffing, hiring, parental engagement, school signs, communication, newsletters, anything that goes home, in everything, our kids should be able to see themselves. And I'd also like to mention that during this time that virtual teaching has taken over our teaching environments in our world, not all is negative. So this is an excellent time to tap into the cultural and linguistic assets that our families bring. Not only our kids, but our families too. And having family members volunteer to read to the students, assigning projects that incorporate language and allow families to be a part of that learning process. Having students listen to podcasts in their native language with their family members and have a discussion about it. These are all ways in which we can engage and involve families and the culture and the language that they all have to offer. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Jose Medina as another dual language advisor for Ellevation, and he was actually one of the authors of the 3rd edition of the Guiding Principles. And I love with the passion he reminds us that as educators, we all play an integral role in amplifying the voices of marginalized communities. But now we go back to my question. So what does that look like in a classroom? So in Ellevation's practice of cross-cultural competency, we adapted one of Dr. Medina's activities. We actually adapted 4 of them, but we're going to highlight today my life map. Students are asked to identify personal experiences that have changed them, reflect on these experiences, and then share how these experiences change the way they react to the world. So let's think about that. What makes an event so important that it changes you, that it teaches you something about life, or it inspires you for the future? Maybe we can take 30 seconds for a moment here and reflect on what would your life map look like? Maybe jot some ideas on our papelitos, on our Post-it notes. And if you want to share, I'd be more than honored to see any of those comments there. What events would you share with someone if they asked you these types of questions? Thank you, Steve, for letting everyone know in case they hadn't heard Dr. Medina. Right, so now I want you to think about your students and what responses you might obtain if they had the opportunity to share their life events with you. You know, and virtually sometimes it's so difficult to make that connection with our kids, with each other. As adults, it's difficult. So imagine with children. So an activity such as this one is going to help you discover your students' past, challenges that they face, successes that they had, dreams, fears that they hold, values, their identities, who they truly are. And for so many of our students who have lived through a traumatic experience, it provides you with the opportunity to uncover that perhaps that's still negatively affecting them and provide for them the social services they need through an outside agency. And then now think about how powerful those conversations around culture, similarities and differences in life experiences, and even social issues can be. So once again, the dual language tips included in our dual language activities remind you that you need to constantly encourage your students to take pride in and celebrate their culture. It reminds you that these conversations, some of them are going to be a little bit uncomfortable. They're going to provide some discordance. But what an opportunity to dig deeper into these cultural differences and past experiences and begin to guide our kids towards having respectful dialogue about similarities more so than those differences. And just a last reminder in the tips, an activity such as this one is not language specific. Students are going to flow in and out of all of their languages, Spanish, English, formal, social, slang, during this type of an activity, and that's okay. And for most of us, we know that as translanguaging. That is perfectly okay. That's the beauty of these types of activities. And I already saw that they went ahead and they posted the 1-pager. So if you click on that link, you'll be able to take a 1-pager of this activity as a takeaway, because this is one of my favorite activities. So I thought it might become yours as well. So another Ellevation activity is titled More Like Me. And here we ask students to rewrite a passage so that it reflects their personal experiences. We encourage them to use descriptive words that are going to connect the text that they're reading to their own culture. And then we provide them with time to share these words and their stories, their new stories, with their peers. It's a great activity to help grow your regional variations visuals aid chart as well. So taking a look of what that might look like, we have here the original passage, which is Greg, who made chocolate chip cookies with his mom. He adds chocolate chips to the batter and he puts it on the baking pan, cooks the cookies in the oven, waits 30 minutes, and the cookies were warm and delicious. But Greg might actually be Juan sitting in your classroom. And instead of cookies, he might actually be making tortillas. And he'd use canela and azúcar. And that batter is called una masa. And he might be using a tortilla press and baking it in comal. And we don't bake them for 30 minutes, it would be 30 seconds. So I look at this and I think, you know, in my world, being from Puerto Rican and Cuban descent, I might say that Juan made sorullos with his mommy. He added queso bola to the batter and he deep fried those sorullos for a quick 3 minutes in really hot oil. And then would have dipped them in mayo cachu. And if you're from Puerto Rico, you know that that's the way we eat them. So the point is that we now allow students to relate culturally to a story or a text that encourages them to feel pride for their culture. They not only have the opportunity to see themselves in a positive way, but now they've become more involved in the story. They have an easier time visualizing the storyline because now they can relate to it. And when these types of student writing happens, you need to take the opportunity to display these commonly used terms for foods, for holidays, for places in an area that kids can always refer to. Once again, whether that's your virtual remote classroom or on the walls, and encourage students to continue to add to that list. All right, powerful new book I've recently added to my bookshelf. It's called En Comunidad, Lessons for Centering the Voices and Experiences of Bilingual Latinx Students. It's written by Carla España and Lucia Dira Herrera. And I'm going to take the opportunity to highlight only chapter 5, which is titled Taking an Informed Stance Against Injustice. Because when I authored the cultural practice, I wanted to make sure that not only did our students embrace their culture and that of others, but that they also use this knowledge to create change in their classroom, in their schools, in their own lives, in the lives of their families, and in their communities. And as the authors remind us, success in this work is when minoritized students feel affirmed in their own identities, confident in their understandings that counter narratives can rise above, celebrating the truths of their lives. Very powerful. And so we go back to, what does that look like in a classroom? How do I make that happen? One of Ellevation's activities in our cross-cultural connections practice is identifying values and beliefs. And this allows students the opportunity to discuss values and beliefs that make up their own identity and how this makes them the very special person that they are. So if you could, I'm going to ask you to take a few seconds and list 3 values that make you who you are in the chat. And I will actually list mine. Love it. Thank you all for sharing. And as we continue to see those trickle in, think about how these values shape what you dedicate your time to, what you intentionally propose to do, how you even approach situations with others. It's important for our students to take part in these discussions on how their values and beliefs impact their actions, and how these values and beliefs are important to them. And everybody has a set of beliefs and values that they live by, and that they are just as important to them. And this understanding is what creates that empathy in your classroom and in the world, and a better understanding of the similarities that we all share. It's crucial that then they understand, we take that a step further, and then they understand how working together can actually create change. And again, not only for themselves, but for their surroundings, their school, their community, and their families. Thank you. They keep coming in. Thank you so much. So I'd love to be able to hear from some of our audience members. I don't know if we can actually, if we've got the raise hand feature and we actually want to open that up, but how are some of you incorporating cultural competency in your classrooms? Because as you can see, this practice is beneficial in all of our classrooms, whether you have a dual language program or not. Aiming for a world in which all students can begin to understand each other a little better and actually work together to create change might end some of the turmoil and the discord that we are presently seeing in our lives. So if you're doing anything to incorporate cultural competency, I'm sure that the rest of us would love to hear all about it. My life map also. Yeah, that's a beautiful one. I know it's called, I've seen it done in different ways, identifying values and beliefs. Also, we have one that's called identity circles. Incorporating culturally relevant realia. Thank you, that's great. Making friends with parents. That's important. Sometimes our parents they want so much to be involved in their children's schooling and they just don't know where to even start, especially if they don't speak English. Learning cultures through books, beautiful. And I want to also stress the fact that, you know, we tend to do this sometimes, and I'm going to say this because we've all been guilty of it. We do these kinds of things during Hispanic Heritage Month. We do these kinds of things during maybe a multicultural world fair at the end of the year to celebrate. This has to be something that is a part, again, not an infusion, has to be a part of our instruction and our objectives every day. Our kids should always know that it's a safe environment, a welcomed environment, inclusive environment for them to open up and share a little bit about who they are and what their culture can bring to us. Not just, oh, let me wait till October so that I could tell everybody, you know, that my favorite snack is sorullos, you know. Beautiful. Thank you to all who continue to share there. All right, so I promised, we're getting close to the end of the hour. I promised we would address 2 learning targets, have time to share some of our ideas with our colleagues, and you'd become familiar with Ellevation's 2 dual language practices of advanced biliteracy and co-construct cultural competency. I also promised that includes some suggestions that you'd be able to implement in any bilingual environment. And hopefully I have lived up to these objectives. So at this point, I'd love to open it up to any additional comments, any questions. Show short video clips of culture. Excellent.
Sandra, there's a couple of questions which I'm happy to sort of curate for you. One I had though as we were going through it, and I'm curious if maybe either people from the audience or yourself might have a comment on it. But obviously with COVID, there are both some challenges and opportunities in implementing effective dual language practices. There's also, I think, probably for many programs, maybe not all, but for many of them, there's also this challenge of the teachers themselves might be co-teaching or team teaching in some cases, but now find themselves doing that in different Zoom environments and the like. I'm curious if there's anything that you've seen or that maybe others have shared around collaborating amongst the teachers in that kind of new environment that that either you could share as good practice or maybe highlight some changes or challenges that have come up.
Yeah, definitely. You know, unfortunately, so much of this lies in the administrative part of program design and that scheduling piece. So when we talk about, for example, bridging languages, that needs to happen collaboratively. That means that I, as the Spanish teacher, have to have some time scheduled with the English teacher, not only to plan, to actually facilitate these conversations for our kids. And that's tricky, even again, even in a face-to-face environment. So online, it can truly become even trickier. But it is because it's a crucial part of learning how language works. That is something that I would highly recommend happen, that we don't say, oh, well, we're not in the classroom anymore, so we'll just, I'll post, for example, a Cognate wall. No, let's talk about it. Let's make sure that we build in that virtual time so that we can have those conversations and teachers can listen to how kids are thinking about language, that meta-linguistic awareness, how they're thinking about language within each one of those languages of instruction, those two classrooms. I think that also I had mentioned the recording of the book, and I think that that needs to be done in both languages, because again, you're looking at a Spanish language learner who will not have at their home a library or even a set of books in Spanish. So how do they practice any of the vocabulary that's being taught during their literacy block online? If they don't have a book, what can we expect from them then? And so it's important that teachers consider that constantly, that it's not just your Spanish speaking student, but it's also your Spanish language learner who needs to have those resources provided for them. Definitely curious to see what some of our other teachers are doing as well.
One of the questions I think is somewhat related is, this is from Kristen Lasser, who says, how do you support families with the L2 development when they are not literate in the L2 and the remote learning in L2 is asynchronous? I'm not sure if you can see that, Sandra, but.
So how am I supporting, I'm sorry, the L2, the learning of L2 for the child, for the student?
I presume, yes, when remote learning in L2 is asynchronous.
Okay, so once again, we go back to, using digital tools such as Flipgrid, which is great. And I know we used it in a lot of the remote teaching environment suggestions that we incorporate in our activity, to be able to assign a student something in which you're giving them the visual, they're listening to you read that, and now they've got to produce something with that. And it could be as easy as yo tengo. And I send that home, recorded in Flipgrid, and now we start to practice because the child's going to have a word bank that they've created, that the teachers created for them. So yo tengo agua, yo tengo teléfono, yo tengo bolígrafo, and they start to insert those words and are recording themselves. I mean, those are all things that they can do on their own. Yeah. Once they can follow a language pattern. But again, it's a lot of work on the teacher's behalf to prepare those materials and send that home.
But those are good examples, though. I really like that one. We've got just another minute or two. I just want to make sure that we address some of the questions that came in. So Maria Torres has a question, which I think is kind of interesting. It says, can you please expand on the idea of teaching culture along with language when it comes to teaching English?
So I hate to assume, but I'm going to assume that you're still in a dual language program and you're the English side of dual. And there's a lot of sites that have authentic, culturally relevant literature, such as folk tales, for example, that have been translated into English. And again, not a fan of translations, but if you're on the English side, your aim here, the objective here is to meet your reading standards, obviously, but to do so in a way that you can incorporate some of the culture of the kids that are sitting in your classrooms. So to take a folk tale from, I don't know, West Africa, or to take one from Vietnam is a beautiful way to bring in the culture of your kids, continue to tap into their cultural experiences as well, because I'm sure many of them or their parents, they'd love to go back to their parents and get some true authentic stories of life in West Africa or in Vietnam. And then begin to share that in the classrooms. So I hope that answered her question.
Great. I think so. Maybe we'll do one more last one here and then we'll wrap up, okay. Sandra. So Delmy Ewing asks, can you talk about the importance and best practices of a student-generated alphabet in pre-K to first? Pretty specific question, but I think that came earlier when you were showing kind of some of the Bitmoji classrooms.
So I think of these alphabet lines that our kids create as their invented spelling, kind of. I would never discourage a child from writing their own alphabet line, because they hear, you know, what they hear and what we hope they heard is always different. And I see that a lot, again, with my own granddaughter as she's sitting there writing in her journal every morning. You know, I look at these and I think, where did she get that spelling from? But it gives me insight as to, wait a minute, that's how she hears that letter.
Yeah, right.
And so I think it's important that as students begin to develop that understanding of sounds and print, and then eventually, you know, how the language works. I think it's important for them to have their own, and then they can go ahead, we go back to similarities and differences, to take their own alphabet and say, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I thought that letter was this one. And capitalizing on what they heard, what it truly should be, but honoring and respecting what they bring as well.
That's awesome. I think it's probably time, Maya, for us to wrap up here. And Sandra, this is wonderful. I found a lot in this to take away, and the sort of, it's a really inspiring theme and topic, especially during this time when, you know, building and sustaining and celebrating our cultures and linguistic differences is so important. And I'm definitely castigar is my word for the day.
Castigar. You can use that at home, right?
Exactly. Well, thank you for the preparation, and thanks to everyone for your participation in this session. There's plenty of comments throughout about whether this would be recorded. We will absolutely be following up and sharing for this and the other sessions that we participated in. So Maya, if there's any other housekeeping items, please bring us home.
Yeah, thanks so much, Teddy. Thank you, Sandra. It was such a pleasure to have you and learn from you. And there's, you know, been such great reception already in the chat. Everybody's thanking you and so excited for this professional learning opportunity and this PD session. So thank you. For everybody that's still on, we'll send out the recordings with links that we were posting in the chat next week. You'll also get a certificate for participating, so you could use that for your own PD credits. Any questions that weren't answered, feel free to reach out to us at Ellevation. We're happy to connect you with Sandra or relay the message to her so that we can answer some of your additional questions and continue to foster that collaboration relationship. So thank you so much. And thank you. This concludes EL Impact, our first virtual conference by Ellevation. We are so excited you were able to join and can't wait to do more like this in the future. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.